Oh, this isn't, I didn't record any of that. Shoot. Alright, so, basically, for the past, I would say, 45 minutes, I've just been talking to myself then, and killing this guy. I mean, you've seen me kill him before, so it's not too bad of a time. There are a couple of things I want to talk about. First, I died about a dozen times to him. Probably actually closer to 15. I lost track a little bit. But I did actually have to adjust my augments a little bit. My lightning resistance was not high enough for him when I first started, and I had to increase my armor absorption because I was taking too much physical damage. And speaking of armor absorption, what I do want to talk about, apparently I'll take a little bit of extra time to talk about, is a couple of things that hold on, why can I not remember the name? Case Deck. Case Deck pointed out I forgot to mention two things in my previous videos and offered a really interesting point of view that I've never thought of because it's just not how I think. So that was really cool, that I want to talk about really quickly as well. But specifically, ooh, that's really nice. The first thing I want to talk about that I forgot to mention in my previous videos is very specifically overcapping resistances. I've mentioned that enemies can reduce your maximum resistances, and I've mentioned in previous episodes of this series that enemies can reduce your resistances, and so overcapping is not a bad thing, but at least for me personally, I don't really find a whole lot of need to do so necessarily in regular campaigns. So and the reason why, there's a very specific reason why, by the way. Let me really quickly just do that really quick. Anyways, so the reason why in campaign I'm not too concerned about my maximum resistance is that you can usually adjust these with augments, which is actually what I did with the Master of Flesh just now, because I needed more lightning resistance. Because he does do a lot of lightning damage. My lightning resistance was not up to par. I wound up putting on 4 augments so I could get the lightning resistance high enough where I was able to survive. Now, the Shaper of Flesh, or whatever his name is, Theoden there, he specifically reduces your resistances by, I think it's 40. So when he hit me with his resistance reducing ability, he brought me down to 69. Nice. Lightning resistance. And he, by the way, he reduces your resistances all across the board, which normally isn't a problem if you're fighting an individual, but because he is the Shaper of Flesh, he's got flunkies that do other damage types, and that caused some problems for me. Actually, I died twice to his flunkies, specifically because he was reducing specifically my vitality resistance. He had a vitality dude for a while there, and my vitality resistance isn't quite where I would want it to be, but that's okay. But in a lot of cases in standard campaign, you can roughly anticipate what kind of resistance reductions you're going to face. For example, I knew he would be reducing my resistances to lightning and aether. I was never concerned about my aether resistance. It was always going to be fine. And by the way, it's roughly 50% that I'll usually leave it at. This gives you a total of about 130% resistance. Alright? Now, most enemies that reduce your resistance aren't going to reduce it by much more than 35% tops, if they do at all. A lot of nemesis, a lot of bosses, and a decent number of heroes reduce your resistances by 20 to 35%, somewhere between there. It depends on the individual. Notable exceptions are Korvac, who reduces your resistances all across the board by, I think, 35. The Master Flesh, who does it by 40, if I'm remembering correctly, and Anasteria, if you choose to fight her, reduces it by like 50%. She only does Elemental, Aether, and Physical, though, so as long as you massively overcap those particular resistances, specifically the Aether and the Elemental, her physical damage is very low. As long as you overcap your Elemental resistance and your Aether resistance via augments, you can then pull the augments out, because you'll notice, and this is something that I can actually indicate here, augments themselves only cost roughly 5,000 bits, right? And then you can go over here and you can actually remove an augment for, you can remove an augment for 6,000. It's going to be roughly 5,000 to remove an augment. So pure bits, I mean, you're at this point in the game when you can buy augments and equip them, you can actually easily afford that. So for me personally, I'm not overly concerned about overcapping my resistances, because just like I did with the Master of Flesh, although I died 12 to 15 times in the attempt, that's okay, because I was able to, and I still wish I had recorded that. I just must have forgotten to press the record button. And I just didn't even notice that my little timer in the corner wasn't going, because I just didn't notice. So I do apologize for that. But back to the main point. Augments are very easy to get your hands on. So for a lot of the campaign, you can roughly anticipate what resistances you're going to need to overcap temporarily via augments. You can also use components before you get to the augment stage. It's a little bit more expensive, because once you're getting rid of the piece of equipment, you either have to destroy the piece of equipment or the component. That's really up to you. But, you know, there's that exciting time as well, and that's generally why, at least for the campaign, I'm not quite so concerned about overcapping all of my resistances. Now that I've killed the Shaper of Flesh, I'm going to pull those augments out of the equipment that I used to increase my lightning resistance, and I'm going to continue to work on getting Pure Theory here to good old level 100. Delightful. But we're having... K-Stack also makes the point that increasing your maximum resistance, like I have here with my fire thanks to Olzewin's Torch, I have 83% fire resistance. K-Stack finds this very important. For regular campaign, I don't. It's not really that huge of a deal. In regular campaign, you can usually get through most of the game without necessarily overcapping any of your resistances. It's not that big of a deal. You know, it's pretty much whatever at that point. But for hardcore characters who really need to be paranoid in all ways, I would actually argue in hardcore, it's more important to increase your maximum resistances than most other stats in the game. It's so supremely important. So I will point that out as well. So for hardcore at least, it's vitally important. For the Crucible and or the Shattered Realm, it's a bit of increase those resistances you can without disrupting your build. If you have a particular idea in mind for a build, you want to focus around some specific skill or some specific armor set, don't sacrifice pieces of that armor set to increase your maximum resistances, but at the very least, ensure you're overcapped on your resistances by, like I said, about plus 50% is usually going to be enough. In my experience, I don't usually go higher than this. For example, 127% fire resistance over maximum. A lot of this is my constellations, and I'm not going to be able to do anything about that because I've got them set up in a very specific way. And that's fine. It's a bit of a waste, but it's because I'm never going to need 127% over max fire resistance. Let's be really honest here. But for things like my Aether Resistance default, now keep in mind that I actually could go a little lower because a lot of the time I actually have my Word of Renewal on, which boosts that by an additional 32%. So I could actually probably get away with 20% here as long as I was really careful about making sure my Word of Renewal was constantly active. I could do with slightly more chaos, but plus 39% over max is generally going to cover me in a lot of situations anyways. For example, Korvac doing 35, that would be covered there, so that's not really that big of a deal. Now, I've been talking mostly about heroes, bosses, and everything, but there are a couple of regular enemies that can reduce your resistances. They're not everywhere. Notable examples would be the half-troll shamans in, where is that called? The half-troll shamans, specifically those in the not the Ancient Grove, specifically those in the East Marsh, have a spell that reduces your poison acid resistance, And there is also the nets that the half-troll hunters can throw that reduce your your pierce resistance, and I believe this is by either 15 or 25%. I can't remember off the top of my head, but that's a notable example. But there are very few and far between areas that have enemies that reduce your resistances in that way. But for regular campaign, just do whatever you can. Like I said, I don't usually go past 50%, and I have alluded to this in previous episodes, but I've never actually sat down and fully explained it, and K-Stack did make a very valid point saying that I should have covered that in the previous episode, and I meant to, I just forgot. But what completely slipped my mind was armor absorption. Now, armor absorption is really interesting. Let's say you have a piece of armor that has 100 armor on it, right? Let's pretend this belt has 100 armor. Let's just pretend. Great. And you take 120 damage, right? This is, I believe, the classic example. Or you take 125 damage, whatever. Let's just say 125 damage because I really like the number 125. So the first 100 damage that your belt has the armor for, 100 armor, 100 damage, the first 100 damage, is going to be reduced by your armor absorption. Now, your baseline armor absorption on all pieces of armor is 70%. So your unadjusted armor absorption, default, that first 100 damage is going to be reduced by 70%, which means you're taking 30 of that 100 damage. And then the remaining 25 gets through scot-free, is added to the 70% reduced. So that 30 damage plus the 25 completely unadjusted damage means you are taking 55 damage from that attack. Alright, that is how armor absorption works. Now, to the best of my knowledge, you can't overcap armor absorption. I don't think that you can really do like over 100%. I've never found any evidence indicating that you can. But when you want to cap your armor absorption, actually I'm pretty sure you can't cap armor absorption. This was a discussion a couple of years ago on the Grim Dawn subreddit. I have vague recollections that somebody mentioned that you can't overcap armor absorption, but I'm not sure if they provided any evidence of that. Anyways, beyond vague memories of a couple of years ago, if you want to get your armor absorption where you really want it to be, you only really need 2 components, and a lot of characters are going to have this available. I don't remember if Scaled Hide, where is that? There we go. Yeah, Scaled Hide is everywhere. So Scaled Hide increases your armor absorption by 20%. The plus 35 armor is just a freebie bonus. We really don't care about that. We're really here for the armor absorption of 20%. And then your second piece is going to be an Ancient Armor Plate, which increases armor absorption by 8%. Now, with your default armor absorption being 70%, you only need 30%, and this gives you 28%. Now, there are other ways of doing this, but Ancient Armor Plates are very commonly found once you hit like level 10. And you can make Scaled Hides, I think, right at the start, or if not, you very easily can find the recipe for it just through early gameplay. So it is a very easy way of increasing armor absorption. Now, the reason why I haven't increased my armor absorption on these 2 pieces prior to the Shaper Flesh is because these weren't intended to be permanent pieces of equipment, and I really didn't want to spend the components on them. I wound up having to because after I would say my 5th death to the Shaper Flesh, I was like, okay, I'm taking too much physical damage here, so I need the extra armor absorption. This is what I'm usually referring to in past episodes. I have referred to, oh, I'm taking too much physical damage, it's because my armor isn't high enough. I was indirectly also referencing armor absorption, but again, as K-Stack pointed out, I did not actually explain this, and unlike the Resistances, where I actually went into at least small detail there, I've never gone into detail with armor absorption. So, there it is. Armor absorption is always pretty... Well, this is vital in the Crucible, in Hardcore, in Shattered Realm, and I do intend on taking Pure Theory into the Shattered Realm. I do fully intend on having this be a Shattered Realm character. Not my long-term one. This is going to be a short-term Shattered Realm character to farm with until I can get someone with a dash. I'm thinking I'll probably do an Oathkeeper or a Soldier at some point with either Blitz or Vire's Might, because that's one of my favorite abilities to use to traverse the Shattered Realm, as I've mentioned before. Very effective for that purpose. But this will be a short-term Shattered Realm runner. So at some point I will need to boost the resistances a bit more appropriately. I will need to overcap them to a roughly 50% level. so that way I can farm. It is also really worth increasing your maximum resistance if you know you're going to be farming in a particular area and enemies do a specific type of damage. For example, let's say I wanted to farm Barog's Bloody Arm. Barog being that first boss you fight in Lower Crossing, the ethereal mutant, but red. Let's say I wanted to farm him. So we've got all these zombies. I know I'm going to be taking some physical damage. I know that there's going to be the elements because there's going to be the cold and lightning zombies. There's going to be the poison zombies. So increasing my poison acid resistance, increasing my elemental resistance, and increasing my armor absorption are things that I would do before grinding out a hopefully really good Barog's Bloody Arm, right? So, you can do that as well, but like I said, it's a little bit different for the Crucible and for Hardcore and for the Shattered Realm because you don't know what you're going to come up against in those. Well, in Hardcore you can still reasonably predict, but a surprise hero reducing or doing a damage type that you weren't prepared for can kill you. So in Hardcore you need to be prepared for everything because you never know when a spontaneous hero doing a damage type you weren't expecting to see in that area comes up. For example, a Chaos Vitality damage dealing ethereal hero would be quite a surprise to most people expecting the usual ethereal and elemental damage, right? And it happens. It's happened to me a couple of times this playthrough, which is fine. So in Hardcore, you absolutely need to be paranoid. In the Crucible and in the Shattered Realm, it's more of a matter of the enemy generation in those is completely 100% random. You have no idea what combination of enemies are going to be coming at you. You could be encountering just the perfect combination of enemies that does every single type of damage. You could be encountering enemies that only do one type of damage, but most often you're going to be coming up against mixed groups of enemies that are going to be doing 3 to 5 damage types at a time, and they're not going to be the usual predictable types of combinations either. You'll get some cannibals in with some ethereals, for instance, potentially. Things like that. So in those two circumstances, yeah, you're going to want to be a little bit more balanced and slightly overcapped across the board, especially since hero generation rate in the Shattered Realm and the Crucible is quite high. Eventually they start just really throwing them all over the place at you, and of course some of these are going to be reducing your resistances. So it is important to keep that in mind. So there is that. With that being said, there was actually 2 other things that I wanted to talk about. K-Stack also pointed out this really interesting point of view that the more resistances you get out of your constellations, the less stringent you have to be with your equipment searching. Now, this is, first off, absolutely true, but personally, I really like the equipment hunt. I find it really exciting, and I enjoy it a lot. So, for me personally, I like being stringent about my equipment. I like finding that perfect piece of equipment. That's just me. If you're not so fond of the equipment hunt, I'm talking specifically about green equipment a lot of the time, by the way. Like Monster and Frequency are one of my favorite things to hunt for. You're going to want to look at a little bit more resistances, for example, out of the Devotion, which I'll have another conversation about. For the Devotion, you could go into the Empty Throne, get your 5... I've recommended the Owl because it increases your damage all across the board, gives you a little bit of elemental resistance, and that's just a really good time. But you could, instead of going for the Owl, if you wanted the resistances instead, the Empty Throne gives you slow resistance, gives you Aether and Freeze resistance, it gives you Pierce resistance, and it gives you Chaos and Stun resistance. I mean, well, it's reduced stun duration, but almost the same thing. So you could go with that instead and still get your 5 purple. I just don't personally I don't really prefer to use the constellations for the resistances because, again, there are pieces of equipment out there that can absolutely massively increase your resistances more than any constellation ever will, and it's just a personal preference of mine. K-Stack also asked why I didn't have the Kraken originally. It's because, honest answer, I forgot that it gives you 2 red and 3 blue, and so does the snake, so I did actually have to readjust. I did have to make some sacrifices, though. I was not able to complete the Rowan's Crown, but I was able to get to Elemental Storm regardless, so mild change from last time, so that's okay. But yeah, I do apologize for not having recorded earlier. I thought I hit the buttons. I must not have. I must have accidentally hit another key. Because in order to activate the recording software, I have to hit Control, Shift, and R. That is how I start recording. And it's a very specific combination that makes sure that I don't accidentally hit it just randomly and use processing power. I must have accidentally not hit the R. I probably hit the E key or whatever by accident. So this will be the last episode with no gameplay, I promise. I'm so sorry. I thought for sure I was recording. I've been talking to myself for the better part of an hour now. This will actually make an hour with 20 minutes here. But it would have been roughly 40 minutes that I was just talking to myself. But yeah, so next we'll be going to the Conclave of the Three. Now, I don't expect to actually go through the entirety of the Forgotten Gods. Like I said, I'm going to stop going through the walkthrough with this character once they hit level 100, and I'm going to start going into the secret area and talk about the secret area, the secret things in the game after they hit level 100, and then I'm going to talk about the Shattered Realm. I'll probably talk about the Crucible. Maybe I'll start a new character, maybe not. Not probably right away. I do have some plans for more stuff. Also, Case Deck mentioned that Iron Crate has mentioned that they aren't going to be updating this game any further, but while I partially agree, there is still the chance that they will, because they've said that before, and then they dropped the equipment overhaul post-Forgotten Gods, like, not even with the Forgotten Gods, but the equipment overhaul, I think it was late 2019 or early 2020, I can't quite remember, and then they dropped the major update that added those extra areas, both of these after they said they weren't going to be updating the game anymore. So yes, they have said that, but the possibility of them updating the game anyways, because for some reason they can't leave it alone, which is fine with me, it still does exist. So yeah, I did want to cover these points. I thought I was recording earlier. I'm so sorry. This will be, I promise I will have gameplay for the next one, like me actually going through stuff. I'm hoping to hit level 100 next episode. So, by the way, I hit level 98 on my way to the Shaper of Flesh. And then I lost all the experience dying to him. All the past level 98 experience dying to him. So, there's that. So, thank you all very much for joining me. I'm so sorry. If you like this, please like and subscribe. If you didn't, please ignore me. And if you have any comments, questions, concerns, ideas, suggestions, requests down below, I'll leave them down below. I will probably be reworking the constellation videos because I have remembered a couple of constellations that would be nice, so to speak. So I will probably be reworking the constellation videos. I will be reworking the Paladin video. I'm behind schedule. I've been very busy at work. I haven't had as much time as I would like. So I have been kind of very busy with work, so I will be getting the Paladin rework up as soon as possible. That's about it. Thank you all very much for joining me, and have a great 24 hours. And one final time, I do apologize. I wish I'd recorded that fight.